is what is happening at this stage right now, and that is what we call a meeting between great minds. It is called AI for National Defense, the power of public-private partnership. You'll be hearing Rana Gujral, the CEO of Behavioral Signals, and Ramesh Menon, CTO at the United States Department of Defense. Rana is an active investor and an advisor to several startups, as well as a contributing columnist at TechCrunch and Forbes. Ramesh works for the Defense Intelligence Agency and is responsible for technology and strategy planning, experimentation, and emerging technology solutions. So please, if you're leaving for a next session, do so in silence, because we have got something very special and slightly secret happening at this stage at the moment. So your attention, everyone, for Rana Gujral and Ramesh Menon.
Now, our topic is somewhat unusual. Typically, not a type of topic that you would see at TNW, right? And when we were discussing this talk, that was the conversation that we were having. Is like, it's a tech event. We're going to talk about national security, defense, and what are we doing about that, and what should we be doing about that. And but there's also a realization that the world's changed quite drastically in the last couple of years, as you may have noticed, right? And so here we are to talk about exactly a topic that is very, very relevant for us. Certainly AI, but how do we apply it for national security, for national defense, and what is being done and what should be done. So Ramesh, thank you for being here. Really happy that you joined us. But maybe perhaps we could start this by having you explain to the audience, like, what is DoD, what is Department of Defense, and what is your role exactly, and then we can deep dive into other things.
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone. So obviously, I think most people know what US Department of Defense is. I don't have to explain much, but technology, the world as we know it has changed, especially since coming out of pandemic and unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation by Russia, and the changing technologies. There's multiple things happening, from climate change. So we have to be prepared. And the way we are looking is to be proactive, understand the implication of all these multidimensional vectors happening into a strategic planning to prevent strategic surprises, and primarily enhance our partnership with our allies and partners around the world for better technology-enabled capabilities. Let's come back to AI. What's AI? It is effectively extracting value from data on a digital platform. What can we use it for? It could be used for decision support, which is like a HR system to understand who your next hire should be. It could be a decision augmentation, similar to what you have in your electric cars. It could be decision automation, where you can have edge AI algorithms running on some unmanned platforms. Or it could be for healthcare. So there are many places. So what we did a few years back, we commissioned a study called National Security Commission for Artificial Intelligence. And you can Google it. It's called NSC-AI. It's a nice 200-page report from US government that basically says that we as a nation in the US should be AI ready by 2025, AI competitive by 2027, and AI mature by 2030. How do we do it? With outside-in innovation model, which means we want to expand the way we work with industry, way we work with academia, way we work with our allies and partners. So that's basically the shape of this. Typically, we don't do much external engagements. We do our own things. And right now, we are reaching out. We want to work with our partners around the world to accelerate the innovation model for a free and democratic world.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think that's a good segue into maybe starting to talk about sort of the dynamics of a public-private partnership, specifically when we're thinking about deploying technologies like AI, but in general, just sort of like driving innovation. So how do you sort of see that happening today? What are your thoughts on it? What's being done right? What could be better? Let's talk about that.
We spend a lot of money, billions of dollars on innovation. And there's two parts. There's pure research that happens in universities and the DoD labs. which is 6.1, 6.2 kind of research. And there is an applied capability, which is typically about TRL 7. TRL is the technology readiness level. So if you're imagining a concept, writing a paper in university, it's like lower TRL levels. Nothing has been invented yet. I want a time machine. OK, it's not there. Or I want to have a quantum communication network. So there are technology readiness level. We do a good job. In fact, DARPA does a really good job. And when DARPA issues and asks from the industry to be part of something, it's at a fairly proven, that concept is proven, we want somebody to implement and deliver, right? That's where it comes around. So our goal is to take things from TRL 7 and move it to TRL 9 into operations, which means it could happen in any university. It could happen from a lab. But that is the sweet spot we want to see. How do we take research from the universities and lab and make it applied and useful? And that is where the researchers should also come out of their pure research mentality and start looking at where can it be applied. Because typically what happens when I talk to a scientist, they say, hey, nobody's funding my science. OK, why is it not? Do you know who the end user is? And that's probably very similar for a startup company. You're making your product, but do you know your customer? How will the customer plan to use it? And maybe you have to tweak something in your product roadmap for the customer to use it more effectively, right? So it's a collaboration where we get different perspectives and then ensure that it fits into the ecosystem that you want to deploy in the operating environment.
Right. Yeah.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. No, absolutely it did. I mean, as you said, I mean, one of the challenges is the lack of explainability often, right? So when you're thinking about sort of a situation where you're going to drive a set of insights using an AI algorithm and try to make a decision based on those insights, you would need to, especially if it's a national security related decision, you would need to sort of explain how you've arrived at that conclusion. But if it's AI driven, often it's very hard to do, right? So one of the things that we're looking at right now is neural nets, and what the language models also use is somewhat of a black box. I mean, it's assigning the statistical weights in somewhat of an autonomous fashion, and it's very, very hard to trace how those weights are assigned. And so it's not necessarily easy or even possible in many situations to sort of go backtrack from sort of the decision to how that decision was arrived at. And so to apply that into a national defense, I mean, I'm sure the lawmakers are not necessarily going to be accepting.
We have fairly robust mechanisms, not just the technical controls like the VNV and like bias and F-scores and things like that, but we also we have something called ICD 203, the tradecraft compliance. So we have to ensure that whatever we deploy is going through a rigorous regulatory framework that meets the explainability and responsible AI criteria, and also the authority to operate. So if I'm the commander of a mission, I have authority for A, B, and C. I can only delegate a subset of my authority. Machine cannot do more than what authorities I have. So we want to make sure that when we program these systems, it aligns to the authorities of the commander. So there are things that we have to do in terms of regulatory framework for delegation of authority. So just because a machine can do A to Z, that's not how it works. If you are in charge, you can do A and B. You can only use subset of A or B or A and B to the machine in a human-machine teaming scenario. That being said, I mean, you work for a very sophisticated AI startup, well-funded by a very notable private equity venture capital fund. And if I read your reports recently, you have a system that can understand human emotions from tone of voice, which is language independent. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So what we do is we extract intelligence and signals from the non-verbal cues in a conversation. And to better understand that in a conversation, there are really two dynamics. One is the spoken word, which is what you're saying, and then there is everything else, which is how you're saying something, which is the pitch and tonal variance, intonations, prosody. And so from our focus on the non-verbal cues, we can extract signals that can roughly be bucketed into three categories. There's emotions like anger, happiness, sadness. Then there's behaviors like engagement, empathy, politeness. And all of this can be done real time. But the most fun bucket is where you're taking these signals and then applying it towards more complex KPIs, such as identifying is someone stressed or distressed or in some sort of a control, and then putting it together into these cognitive models to predict the state of mind and intent to do something or intent to not do something, which really sort of is an essential building block of AGI because it's a essential brain function to understand the emotional and the behavioral construct of a person that you're conversing with. And so when we're building these AGIs, they would be needing this capability, and essentially, that's really our core focus.
Now I get worried, right? Because if some of those technologies get into my car and I'm going to buy an ice cream, they say, hey, you're already overweight, no ice cream, right? So can you explain what is System 1 and System 2 AI?
Yeah, so I mean, when you're sort of thinking about the aspect of thinking in a human brain, there's sort of two aspects of thinking. There's Systems 1 thinking, and then there's Systems 2 thinking. The Systems 2 thinking is the sort of the initial implementation of AI is largely focused on Systems 2, and Systems 2 is sort of the logical brain sort of using data and parameters and sort of like, and arriving at these decisions in a slow, methodical fashion. It's very sort of, predictable, and for the most part. And the Systems 1 thinking is autonomous, right? So it's called a non-thinking brain. And so this is sort of like the instant thought that comes to our mind. It's somewhat autonomous. We don't really control why it comes. I mean, you can also sort of like, lay in intuition and gut in there. And so one of the things that we've focused on, in fact, I'm glad that you mentioned this, is when you look at, implementation of AI, especially in the national security and defense, there was a very specific mandate almost 10 years ago that, the technologies that you deploy on the AI technologies that you deploy on the defense side should largely be focused on Systems 2, because Systems 1 is unreliable and somewhat unexplainable. And what we've realized now is that that's incomplete, right? So if you look at how a human brain works, it combines those elements. You have to combine the Systems 2, the logical part, to the intuition, to the, sort of the autonomous part. And so that's kind of what we focus on, the Systems 1 thinking. And now we're really excited about sort of layering this on top of some of the sophisticated technologies that you see, in the national security arena today.
What about society's ability to manage all these change? Technology is moving at a very rapid pace, and most people are not really sure how to handle this rapid, like an orbital velocity, right? You're taking off at a exponential speed. It's not a linear function. So when a change happens at an exponential speed, what's your recommendation to the small business owners or city planners and governments? What do you think they should do? I mean, including me, as US government, the change is happening very fast. I mean, we get calls from White House, what to do, and I would say take care of your people, right? That's my view, but what's your view as a CEO?
I think I'll unpack this a little bit into a few different flavors, right? So there's obviously a lot of conversation about things are moving so fast that maybe things are a little bit out of control, and that's not really that far from truth. But then the question is, what do we do about it, right? So there's a lot of conversation about regulations, and the talk about maybe slowing things down, taking a break till we figure this out. Well, we can say that, but we all know that's not practical, right? The question is, well, what do you actually slow down? Really, you could sort of maybe start to control how some of these models are being trained, and necessarily sort of, build a little bit more transparency around that. But technology is evolving in such a fast fashion that you don't really need a lot of GPUs to train the models. You could do it, using other technologies, and that sort of eliminates that control piece out of it. So I think, what I feel we need to do is, one, obviously start to think about regulations, but more than that, I mean, there's other aspects of sort of building an empathetic AI, and building AI that allows us to sort of create the right ecosystem, the right value model of humanity into the AGI decision making, and also start to talk about, which I think it's about time, how are we going to live with this? So rather than panicking about the advent of AGI, is to start to understand, what does an AGI society look like? How does that change the fabric of the society? How does that change sort of like, how, some certain countries and certain value systems operate? And what would it mean to sort of operate in that world? And I think we need to start to have a conversation about that. I think it's very relevant and timely to do that. Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.